Welcome to our thyroid health workshop. Today, we're going to be diving into some common case presentations that we see across the health and fitness industry. We'll talk about the differences between Western medicine approaches to thyroid issues and what fitness professionals typically think of when it comes to thyroid issues. Now, if you look online in the social media sphere, probably one of the most common conversations related to thyroid is that of chronic dieting and the implications of metabolic adaptation. But today we're going to talk about more than that, how nutrient deficiencies contribute to thyroid issues. Stress and gut health all play a role in terms of thyroid health and function. So we'll dive into ways to improve the actual thyroid function, improve thyroid conversion, and some of the lifestyle factors that are driving the issues, as well as the prevalence of thyroid cases, since many people, don't really realize how common thyroid issues are, and they can actually be underdiagnosed relative to other issues. Today's focus is going to mainly be on case presentations related to thyroid labs. There's some overlap here significantly with autoimmunity and Hashimoto's, but we have an entirely different segment and section of our functional nutrition and metabolism specialist program that dives into Hashimoto's and autoimmunity. So with that said, today's focus, we're going to kind of focus on the gut health piece, stress, micronutrient deficiencies, and even how chronic dieting and metabolic adaptation can play into thyroid issues, as well as some other kind of considerations or conversation around that. We'll talk about blood work, biofeedback, some of the basic coaching strategies we can use with thyroid cases, and even how body temperature plays a role in terms of this thyroid conversation as well. So first, anytime we're thinking about factors that impact thyroid function, and you'll see in this diagram that I have for you, most people really just think about the center, which is kind of this bronze or gold colored thyroid gland. And thyroid, that gland itself, produces the hormone T4. Now, T4 is like a thyroid hormone reserve. It needs to be converted to the metabolically active T3 in order to act and exert its effects. The most sort of potent effects come from that free T3 or free thyroid hormone. So today, when we're talking about thyroid, realize we can talk about nutrients that improve thyroid status, things that optimize conversion, like lessening inflammation in the body, mitigating chronic dieting, or having seasons to our nutrition or periodization. We also want to think about that increased conversion of T4 to T3 from a nutrient perspective, and what actually happens in terms of the cellular sensitivity to thyroid hormones, which is influenced by vitamin A, zinc, and exercise. So you'll see this diagram again as we're moving through, or different variations of it, but this is to give us the big picture that when we talk about thyroid, we're speaking a lot more than just T4 or TSH and kind of the conventional notion of what people look at when it comes to thyroid. We'll also talk about some lab measures and ways to pay attention to this as well. So when it comes to the Western medicine stance and fitness stance, when it comes to thyroid issues, typically Western medicine, obviously there's cases where there's a thyroidectomy or a thyroid cancer. It's obviously very different than a coaching scope. Today, we're talking about how lifestyle, nutrition, and exercise can impact thyroid. But the medical stance on this is mostly that the issues are due to the gland itself, and thyroid issues can be addressed by providing or prescribing Synthroid, which is levothyroxine is the generic version of that. And by providing T4, it brings down TSH levels. That's pretty much the standard of care in Western medicine. Now, the problem with that is even when you may lower TSH, someone may still be symptomatic in terms of their thyroid issues. They may also not have optimal free T3 levels. So it may lower TSH and potentially even increase T4, but if they still have symptoms and they're still suffering, or they haven't improved their entire lab set, well, it's possible that this person may continue to have similar problems. The fitness stance on thyroid issues is often that thyroid issues are just from undereating or metabolic adaptation, and they don't necessarily pay attention to micronutrient status, whether someone's chronic dieting or not. They don't necessarily pay attention to inflammation to the degree that they should, and potentially missing things like toxicity or gut dysbiosis and how gut issues are playing into overall thyroid function and conversion. One thing that's going to come up multiple times today is how thyroid hormone conversion and the activity of deiodinase enzymes, which are the little enzymes that come along and cleave T4 to turn it into T3, those happen in the periphery. So that's not necessarily happening solely at the thyroid gland itself. That could be happening at the gut or liver. And so understanding the activity that's going on and why this nutrient status, lowered inflammation, managing, keeping your clients from chronic dieting, why all of these things are so important. A lot of that is because of what's happening downstream of the thyroid. And we'll continue to talk about that as we move through the presentation. So with the Western approach to thyroid, usually doctors are evaluating and screening solely based on TSH levels. If TSH appears to be normal, thyroid markers may not be evaluated regardless of symptoms. So if TSH seems to be in range, which in Western medicine may even go up to a 4.5 on some lab sets, and even a standard expanded thyroid panel may not necessarily provide enough information to identify certain issues for clients. So significant percentage of people who even have this TSH drawn may have clinical or subclinical thyroid symptoms. So then when we look at the fitness approach to thyroid in this conversation, a lot of times what happens is coaches are blindly recommending things like reverse diets or, hey, we just need to get your food up and then your thyroid will follow. But what they're missing is if something else is driving the root cause of the thyroid issue, adding food is just going to lead to weight gain. So if you've ever had someone who didn't respond to reverse diet the way that maybe your other clients did, it could be because you basically push that food too fast. You maybe have a limited understanding of blood markers and what's going on from a biofeedback and body temperature perspective. Maybe you're neglecting certain autoimmune risk factors. So you're reverse dieting this person, not realizing maybe there's some irritation going on in terms of certain foods in their diet. Maybe because you have more of a fitness and lifestyle background or health coaching, you could be adverse to medication or prescriptions, which while we obviously don't want people to be over-medicated or given things that they don't need, some people may benefit from having thyroid replacement or taking a prescription thyroid product. Now, this is obviously going to depend on a case-by-case basis. This is not medical advice or a substitute for it, but there are certain individuals who will find that thyroid optimization is helpful for them, and it allows them to achieve not only the appropriate physiological concentration of free T3 in their serum labs, but the most important thing is how it shows up in terms of biofeedback and if they're still symptomatic or not. So some misconceptions when it comes to thyroid health. A lot of people, especially in the health and fitness space, think, well, doctors will just order what my clients need. And this slowly but surely has been debunked over time. I think people are realizing that most of the time their clients, even if they go to the doctor and say, hey, can I have a full thyroid panel? They walk out and they have one number. They have TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And we'll talk about what that particular value is. But TSH is just the communication between the pituitary and the thyroid. So basically how your brain speaks to the thyroid gland itself. And when that TSH stimulates the thyroid then produces T4. And that's part of the role of the thyroid in the endocrine system. Another misconception is that coaches and practitioners think, well, I can't access tests related to thyroid, so I just have to rely on my client's doctor, or maybe you're using some random consumer website, but you're paying huge markups for that. We solve that problem inside FNMS, our flagship program inside Metabolism School. And then a lot of people think, I don't need this information to be a good coach. If I know how to make nutritional adjustments and push calories up or down or do linear caloric regression and progression, it's fine. Or healthy habits are going to solve this entire issue. And healthy habits are great, but you need to know the dose of the right habits for the right person and how to individualize that based on what's going on in terms of their blood work, their biofeedback, and more. So remember, clients don't want just fitness right now. They're actively searching for things related to hormone optimization, thyroid health, gut health, and more. So another big misconception is, well, clients aren't really looking for this. They just want weight loss or fat loss. And that's true. They may want to improve their body composition or lose body fat, but it's actually a lot easier to lose body fat and improve your body composition and look better. And you also feel a lot better too when your thyroid levels are optimized. So let's talk about the truth about thyroid. Thyroid dysfunction is often underdiagnosed, relatively speaking, in Western medicine, and it doesn't always show up by just looking at TSH alone. And TSH is such a wide reference range that some individuals might be in the 4s with their TSH before they're finally getting attention from their primary care physician or maybe even an endocrinologist. Over 60% of individuals with thyroid dysfunction are unaware of their condition per epidemiological data, and an estimated 20 million Americans have some form of thyroid disease. And that's even just based on conventional criteria, not the subclinical diagnoses or where people may fall into a gray area. If you were to include that, it would be significantly higher. Now, if you add in any Hashimoto's data, or you add in people, let's say in the fitness industry who have a severe amount of metabolic adaptation from chronic dieting, we're kind of on that fringe, this number would grow exponentially. This is just looking at kind of a conventional sample using more Western medicine criteria. So 20 million is still a ton and more than enough that there's people who truly need your help out there. But sometimes that number, it seems underreported, relatively speaking. So if you're here and you're like, Sam, this all sounds great. I'm here to learn about thyroid health, but why are you the guy to teach me? So my background, I've been in the industry, started off as a personal trainer, and then realized that my clients needed more. I needed more. I wasn't necessarily a conventional case myself. I went down the endocrinology rabbit hole largely because of a head injury that I experienced in my teens, and going to the primary care physician and getting basic blood work didn't necessarily spell out the symptoms I was experiencing or help me to optimize my health. From that point forward, not only training and coaching individuals, I competed myself for almost 10 years. During that time, using this type of information to apply to my own health and fitness journey, and also helping clients and complex cases throughout that process. After competing for about a decade, coaching clients, during that time, began mentoring other health and fitness professionals around the world, started a podcast. I've reached over 1.5 million unique downloads worldwide doing that, wrote a book, Metabolism Made Simple, and I'm also the founder of Metabolism School, which, if you're familiar with our FNMS program, that is our live mentorship and specialization program inside of Metabolism School. So aside from my own content, also contribute to a lot of industry publications, different articles, podcasts, videos, prominent YouTube channels, pretty much you name it. That's been a key focus of mine, is like partnering with other educators online. And so if it's your first time here, welcome. If you're a repeat workshop attendee, this is one of our first times really diving into thyroid in depth. So I hope that you enjoy this one relative to other free content that you've attended in the past. And so what we're going to focus on today, again, is really thyroid health through the lens of how stress, gut health, chronic dieting impact thyroid for clients. And if you are interested in learning more on the autoimmune side or Hashimoto's or some of the more advanced cases and conditions, would definitely recommend checking out our FNMS program. We have a lot of folks from that program live here on this call, viewing this presentation as we speak. So the truth about thyroid, when we look at this at a deeper level, is you'll realize there's actually multiple root causes for thyroid issues, and it's important to understand how those contribute to what your clients may be experiencing. So one really big one is stress, or HPA axis dysfunction. So stress in and of itself is going to impair that T4 to T3 conversion. Stress can increase CRH and impact gut permeability. Does a number of different things that are going to impact overall thyroid status. Stress depletes key micronutrients, whether that be magnesium, vitamin C, B complex vitamins. Also, it's going to kind of challenge our antioxidant systems, which we certainly need things like selenium and B vitamins to help produce our own endogenous antioxidants. So chronic stress is going to dysregulate that HPA axis. It may, in some cases, you may see suppressed TSH. I'll show you a diagram of this after this table. So it may suppress TSH and then also impair that conversion of T4 to T3. Gut issues are a key player here, not only because of the potential for malabsorption and not absorbing all of our nutrients, but gut issues in and of themselves, having that gut inflammation, again, is going to impair that thyroid conversion, looking at T4 to T3, and having increased systemic inflammation is going to increase someone's risk for Hashimoto's and other autoimmune conditions, which then will create kind of this feed-forward vicious cycle in terms of their thyroid health. Remember, a significant percentage of thyroid conversion occurs in the gut. Again, that's one of the areas in the periphery where we're seeing T4 become that metabolically active T3. Nutrient deficiencies, so selenium, magnesium, zinc, vitamin A, iodine, all play into this. Now, there's different sides of the industry. You're going to see different extremes. People are going to say megadose iodine, or you need to cut iodine out completely. And some of this is And then you'll see people who don't even realize that iodine is actually a key base in overall thyroid hormone. And that's why the deiodinase enzyme, what it's actually doing is that enzyme is removing an iodine molecule from T4 to create T3. So with that, nutrient deficiencies are a key player. It's about understanding the sweet spot and Goldilocks amount of key nutrients like zinc, selenium, vitamin A. Obviously, vitamin A being a fat-soluble vitamin, you can have toxicity there as well. So it's so important to understand how to audit a client's food log, be able to look if they have different risk factors for nutrient deficiencies. So for example, if you live in a coastal region, your risk for iodine deficiency may be different than someone who lives inland. If someone is vegan or on a dairy-free diet, dairy is a source of iodine. A lot of people may not be consuming dietary iodine if they're not consuming seaweed, dairy products, cranberry, and more. So when you go through and either you're on a very kind of bland Western diet, or if you're someone who's removed dairy, you're going to start to realize that like, okay, I may potentially be having these nutrient gaps. So that's where someone adding even like a very small amount of cranberry, adding seaweed, iodized salt, because a lot of people don't realize when you consume kind of the popular fitness culture, pink salt or Himalayan salt, or even Redmond salt or sea salt, many of those are not iodized. And so with that, you're not getting that iodine coming in with the sodium. So nutrient deficiencies are going to be a big one. Definitely recommend, this is somewhere as far as our micronutrient guide inside FNMS. So if you're attending the call, you're already in our live program. We have a 30+ page micronutrient reference material that's going to help spell that out for you in terms of those nutrients like selenium, or learning more about zinc and more. Metabolic adaptation and chronic dieting is another reason for thyroid issues. So part of this is just a natural process that occurs because as we have less energy coming in or less calories coming in, our body is down regulating energy expenditure. So we're basically conserving, think of it as we're being somewhat thrifty in terms of the expenditure of calories. So this is actually something our body does as part of our adaptive physiology. And this adaptation that occurs is transient. So typically if you are to increase food a bit, or you get out of that, or you gain body fat, you improve hormonal status. That's something we see pretty frequently if people are moving in and out of those phases. Now, what happens though, when someone diets for an extended period of time, has very low body fat levels, they're very calorically restricted, and they're also exercising to an extreme degree beyond what they can recover from. And we start to see sort of that red S presentation, which is relative energy deficiency syndrome in sport. So when you see relative energy deficiency combined with really intense physical activity, low calories, low micronutrient status, not to mention there's probably inflammation going on in those cases as well, you realize that long-term energy restriction is what's playing into those lower T3 levels. So this is where we see increase in stress hormones, lower T3. This is not like a broken metabolism. People market this as like, you have metabolic damage, when in reality, all that's happened is your body has basically had an adaptive response to the chronic dieting. So with that chronically calorically restricted state, the biggest mistake some people might make is if they're not repleting key nutrients, they're not alleviating stress from the body, modulating training, sleep, etc., and they just push food super high, this person may be in a situation where they experience more rapid weight gain. The fifth thing here is going to be gland dysfunction, or more about like a structural issue. Some people need to have their thyroid removed, or they have thyroid cancer. Now, that's obviously beyond the scope of this presentation, and nothing, in this presentation is medical advice or a substitute for it. But there are situations where in like autoimmune cases, for example, there are antibodies produced by the immune system that are attacking the thyroid. And now you can get this into remission naturally through nutrition, supplementation, lifestyle. Some people may choose to go on different medications, but autoimmunity is often the result of chronic immune activation or inflammation. So gland dysfunction, could be something, maybe having thyroid cancer, or someone who has Hashimoto's, which is covered more in depth inside FNMS. Those are all possibilities of stuff that can go on at the level of the actual gland. But for the focus of today's presentation, we're really, really zeroed in on the first four. So metabolic adaptation, nutrient deficiencies, gut issues, and stress or HPA axis dysfunction. Now, in these common thyroid patterns or lab patterns, one thing you're going to notice is there are situations where people could have a relatively normal TSH level and still be experiencing thyroid symptoms. So a TSH of any level with low or normal free T3 and or free T4 is basically considered to be subclinical hypothyroidism or suboptimal thyroid function. That's probably the most common presentation. Now, when people have a medically diagnosed hypothyroidism, typically what we're seeing there is high TSH in the Western range, which the Western range, again, that cutoff is typically about 4.5. They typically have low free T3, and they'll have normal or low TPO antibodies. If they had higher TPO antibodies and TGAB, which is thyroglobulin antibodies, that would be more of a sign based on that antibody number that they may have Hashimoto's. Now, again, it's not kind of our core focus today, but just wanted to allude to that as we're moving through these thyroid cases. Now, I'm going to list out specific thyroid labs that are helpful to understand, as well as biofeedback indicators, body temperature, even the specific body temperature that if someone dips below that you're going to want to pay attention to. But these thyroid patterns are going to come up over and over again. So when working with thyroid cases, we're using a mix of qualitative and quantitative assessment. One thing I hate is when people get so lost in the numbers, they don't look at someone's actual symptoms and how it presents on an intake form, their biofeedback. If you're not looking at the food log, how are you going to actually know if the person's consuming sources of dietary, selenium, zinc, iodine, et cetera? We want a health history questionnaire because things like environmental exposure, potential medications that they've been on. We'll talk about how even things like birth control and SSRIs can contribute to some thyroid symptoms. There's a lot of overlap between thyroid and mental health concerns. So people who experience depression and anxiety sometimes have untreated hypothyroidism or undiagnosed subclinical hypothyroidism. So we want that qualitative assessment and quantitative. So quantitative is going to be a mix of things like blood chemistry. Now, in thyroid, you're mainly going to use blood or serum labs. If this were a different presentation on something like reproductive hormones, or maybe for adrenal health, you could use saliva. For reproductive hormones, there's things like the Dutch test. But for thyroid, really our core focus, the gold standard, is serum labs. That's how you're going to get TSH values. That's how you're going to get T4, T3, free T4, free T3, reverse T3, TPO antibodies, and more. So the other numerical component we can use here would be something like body temperature, because that actually gives an indication. Thyroid is closely intertwined with someone's body heat and thermogenesis. We also have the symptom scorecard. So I'll give you an example of a thyroid health specific symptom scorecard, which can include things like body temperature, hair, skin, nail health, and even things like motility will play into that as well, even though that's a little bit more on the gut side of things. So if you are in FNMS, in addition to this presentation today, what you're going to want to dive into is our thyroid mini case study, because it spells out step-by-step practical review of a thyroid case. I'm going to give 2 to 3 examples here today in the presentation, but there's an entirely separate one with a practice lab set, food log, and more inside our mini case studies. We also have our thyroid reference guide and action guide. The action guide walks you step-by-step how to work through any complex thyroid case and how you would advise a client in that situation. So today, I'm going to give a little preview of that, diving into 2 to 3 example cases and manifestations of how a thyroid issue may arise. But some of you who are viewing this presentation and you're already in the program, you're going to want to go into our community section under the pinned resources, and you're going to want to download those 3 to 4 corresponding materials that go more in depth than this presentation. Obviously, I have a limited amount of time with you guys today. A great review and reinforcement is going to be that thyroid mini case, your thyroid reference guide. Use the action guide for your actual client cases to help design your program and do future check-ins. And you can use our blood chemistry reference material in order to determine the appropriate optimal reference range versus what's going on in that Western medical range. Now, I'm still going to give that list of labs for everyone on today's presentation so you can see what it looks like, the difference between what's being drawn in Western medicine versus a truly complete thyroid panel, and even an example in terms of some sample costs of how that might compare to what people are seeing in Western medicine. So typically, if you were to go to even a primary care physician and you really advocate for yourself, you really push for it, there's potential that even if you were to get those numbers drawn, they're not covered by insurance. when you get that bill in the mail, it may be upwards of $1,000 to have a pretty comprehensive lab set. Through our program partners and our program partners medical director, we're able to basically issue these requisitions at a much lower cost for clients and also for practitioners. And you can even further customize these based on your client's needs. The foundational panel is very affordable, and the costs typically start under $200. And then if you're looking at really more of a robust panel with tons of data related to cardiovascular health, thyroid, reproductive hormones, looking at a full metabolic profile, insulin sensitivity, and more, that's, slightly more of an investment, but still incredibly reasonable compared to that bill that you might get in the mail from Western medicine. So not only is we have the information to break this down, but we actually have the skill to understand what it means, how it applies to nutrition, training, lifestyle, and supplementation. And we can access things that our clients can't actually get on their own, and doing it all within a coach's or health professional scope of practice by partnering with the appropriate medical directors and companies to be able to make this happen. And that's all available inside of FNMS. So coming back to our original diagram where we talked about factors that affect thyroid function, we really placed an emphasis on nutrients, stress, things like infection, trauma, inflammation, and autoimmune is obviously a component here. And then looking at the cellular sensitivity to thyroid hormones. So if you have someone who's obese or overweight with high levels of inflammation because of a standard American diet, low levels of exercise, they can improve their sensitivity to thyroid hormone by getting into motion, by exercising, and doing some of the basics, right? That's a very straightforward thyroid case, repleting key micronutrients and getting that person going. Now, the more advanced cases we see might be someone who's maybe been in health and fitness for a while. Maybe this is even, for some of you listening, you've experienced this in your own health, is you've dieted before. This is not your first rodeo when it comes to potentially restricting calories. You've trained intensely for a period of time. You're starting to see a decline in terms of that thyroid hormone profile. Maybe you've had to go on certain elimination diets, or you've eliminated certain foods for your gut health, or you've tried to, different dietary approaches. And so because of that, things like stress compounded over time, excess exercise, inflammation, when we're not able to recover from that stimulus, and then we also are undernourished from a micronutrient perspective, that's really a terrible combination for our thyroid health. So this is thyroid function explained in terms of kind of your endocrinology 101, how it works inside the body. So your thyroid gland is similar to when we think about endocrine function in your endocrine system. Typically what's happening is there's the brain signaling to the actual gland itself. The gland may produce a hormone, and then there may be additional conversion that happens downstream from that. So if you're familiar with reproductive health, the hypothalamus signals the pituitary. The pituitary would signal the ovaries in women or testicles in men. The testicles, for example, would produce testosterone, and then that is converted to estrogen through an enzyme in the body called aromatase. With thyroid health, we still have the hypothalamus speaking to the pituitary through a hormone called TRH, thyrotropin releasing hormone. That TRH signals the pituitary to produce TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And then the pituitary is signaling the thyroid to produce T4, which is like a thyroid hormone reserve. Think of it as it's like this tank of T4 that we have. That is converted in the periphery to T3 through an enzyme that helps us to kind of unlock that. Now, if we have higher levels of inflammation, if we have chronic dieting history, certain nutrient deficiencies, stealth infections, things like that, it's possible we may see elevations in the biological opposite of T3, that is reverse T3. And so I have a diagram for you guys that we'll go into of what's actually happening at the cell, but the opposing factor here, so when you look at the cell that's pictured on this slide here, you'll see RT3 and T3 are basically competing for receptor sites. If you've consumed some of my content in the past, you'll know that I talk about it as a biological opposite, or like a doppelganger that's impersonating T3. So if you're someone who's familiar with kind of like 90s, 2000s to 2010 music, super popular character at that time would be Eminem or Marshall Mathers. He had his character Slim Shady that he created in his music videos. If you think about the real Slim Shady in that music video, He has all of these other imitators who act and walk like him and talk like him, but they're not quite him. Well, reverse T3 is like that for T3. So T3 is the one that's actually acting on the cell. It has that binding affinity. It's exerting the desired effects. It's doing good things in terms of elevating body temperature and heart rate, helping in terms of metabolism and thermogenesis. Reverse T3 is almost like pumping the metabolic brakes, so to speak. Now, some people overvalue this marker and they look at reverse T3 a little too much compared to the entire picture of someone's metabolic health. So don't think that that's like your keystone singular factor. People zoom in on that. It's kind of almost myopic. They get over focused on reverse T3, sometimes even spending extra money or making their clients spend more money, when if they understood how to interpret biofeedback, other aspects of blood work and body temperature, you'd have a really good idea of what was going on, even if you didn't actually have reverse T3. And if you're going to a Western provider, they don't actually view reverse T3 as like a clinically relevant marker. They're probably going to disregard it anyways. So someone's not necessarily going to get prescribed thyroid hormone based off of a elevated reverse T3 value. Now, maybe working with a functional medicine practitioner or otherwise, that could change. But for the most part, I just want to make you guys aware, you need to understand what's happening from a biological or physiological perspective, but that doesn't mean that you should overvalue that or weight that more than every other marker. So thyroid hormones, big picture, are enabling our cells to expend more energy. And the two main thyroid hormones that we're talking about are T4 and T3, T3 being kind of that downstream product from T4. T3 and T4 help maintain the body's metabolic rate by increasing or decreasing energy consumption, just like a thermostat does in a home when it regulates kind of that hot air and cold air. So think of an HVAC system. If it's hot outside, turns on that cold air, versus if it's cold outside, ideally your heat turns on if you have a functional HVAC system. So depending on what season you're moving in, you see that HVAC kind of adjust accordingly. Now, a healthy or an adaptive and responsive endocrine system is pretty much acting like that thermostat at all times in response to external stimulus and even some internal stimulus as well. But that external stimulus would be things like stress, overall energy availability in terms of calories, and more. So when we break down the HPT axis, remember, it's very similar to hormone production in a lot of other ways. The biggest mistake people make when they think about thyroid and endocrinology is they think that, similar to sex hormones, that cholesterol is the base, when that's actually not true. So cholesterol is a base of steroid hormones. Thyroid is not a steroid hormone. It's a combination of tyrosine and iodine. So if you've seen, different kind of social media influencers talking about that, cholesterol is a root or base of something like testosterone or progesterone or estradiol. And what happens is cholesterol gets kind of a haircut from a side cleavage enzyme to become pregnenolone, and then can become these reproductive hormones. That's not the case for thyroid. Thyroid is not based in cholesterol. So just to make sure you guys understand that, there are some relationships between thyroid and cholesterol. Like if you are hypothyroid, you have a greater chance that you'll have elevated LDL, but that doesn't mean that the base molecule or the base of the hormone is actually cholesterol. That's a really big mistake that I see with folks who haven't had any background education on those hormones. So understand the difference between the two. So the hypothalamus and pituitary are communicating. Then downstream, the pituitary communicates to the thyroid, and then we have that T4, and then the T3 is what's actually acting on the cell. So you can see that broken down here in more of like a linear diagram instead of more of a graphic. So if you like more of like arrows and flow chart, this is going to be more helpful in cementing your overall understanding of that. We do post graphics like this both on my social media accounts and our Metabolism School account. So if you're not following at Metabolism School on Instagram, make sure you check that out because we will throw those up there. And there's a whole archive of tons of really helpful infographics, both on that page and on mine, which is at Sam Miller Science. Really some of our most popular content from 2021, 2022, even 2023, were really those infographics and different kind of maps of metabolism and physiology. So let's talk about some key benefits and how it works when we're looking at thyroid activity. So every cell in the body has receptors for thyroid hormone, and that could be bone cells, liver cells, brain cells, immune cells, mucosal barrier cells. So even the brain cell aspect, right? That makes more sense in terms of the connection between thyroid health and depression. Reverse T3 competes with free T3 at the cell receptor site. So that's what I was talking about in terms of the biological opposite. So if you're looking at this particular diagram on your screen, the little red reverse T3 molecule, it's like, let's say you're not a big music person, or maybe you just weren't super into hip hop or rap growing up. Maybe you understand the example of like, if you were to go to work and there was an employee parking spot, or like you had a parking spot, there's a certain amount of spaces in the parking lot. It's almost like someone with a very similar car, make and model, maybe it's a different color. They try to park in your parking spot, almost like a little imitator there. So T3 is acting on the target cell to exert its desired effects. But if we have elevations in reverse T3, that's going to compete at that site. Reverse T3 opposes the biological action of active T3 and slows metabolism. And this is a vital function in time of stress when the body needs to conserve energy. So historically, if you think more from like an evolutionary anthropology perspective, if we had low amounts of food, high amounts of stress, and we needed more of a conservation mechanism in terms of metabolism, our endocrine system making these adaptations would have made more sense. But now we have refrigerators and freezers, and you can order things on Instacart from the grocery store, or you can drive yourself to the grocery store, maybe walk if you live in a large metropolitan area. And so in present day, it may not seem super helpful. You're like, come on, body, I actually want my metabolism to be less thrifty because it'll help me to achieve my goals, when in reality, your body has similar hardwiring to your ancestors, and that's what can be frustrating at times when these adaptations are occurring. So let's talk a little bit about thyroid labs and some of the most important benefits, key benefits of having these thyroid labs. So if we were to make a list, right, we're going to have TSH, total T4, total T3 could be helpful here as well, free T4, free T3, reverse T3, TBG, and this is basically a transport protein for T4 and T3. If you're familiar with other transport proteins in the body, or maybe you're a little more advanced in your understanding of some of these topics and the endocrine system, SHBG is basically a binding globulin or binding protein for sex hormones. TBG is a binding globulin or binding protein for thyroid hormones. So when you see that in labs, you can understand, okay, these are both binding proteins, but what they're binding to and what they have a binding affinity for is a little bit different. TPO antibodies, these are antibodies that attack thyroid peroxidase. TGAB, these are antibodies that attack thyroglobulin, or the binding protein that we were discussing. And then TSI antibodies actually attack the TSH receptor. So those are three different types of markers that are indicating an attack that's going on in terms of our body and our internal health. Now, that list is important and something that we emphasize in terms of when you hear someone say, okay, complete thyroid panel, even having TSH, free T4, and free T3 is going to be better than only having TSH, right? So there's relative levels to this. It is nice to have all of those, but you can still have a tremendous amount of information with TSH, free T4, free T3. And then if you have a client with autoimmune risk factors or hereditary disposition to something like Hashimoto's, you'd obviously want the TPO antibodies and the TGAB as well. So in terms of common overlapping issues, we see elevated LDL cholesterol profile. Now, I'm not one of those individuals who fear mongers around cholesterol and heart disease. I think there's a lot of more modern information around insulin sensitivity, C-reactive protein, ApoB, lipoprotein A, all of our different cardiovascular risk factors and inflammation that precede things like plaque development and endothelial dysfunction. But it's important to understand kind of that correlation or metabolic connection between thyroid and LDL. And when you spot it, you realize, okay, if someone's symptomatic and maybe their free T3 is kind of trending down and they have elevated LDL, it just kind of supports your hypothesis of what's going on. It's almost like when someone has higher fasting insulin and they have lower SHBG, or they have lower fasting insulin and higher SHBG, because those typically have an inverse relationship, you can understand, okay, in that setting, maybe someone with the latter example of the low insulin and high SHBG, that would come from like a low carb diet or low calorie diet and under eating, versus someone on a Western diet consuming hypercaloric foods and overeating maybe has high insulin and low SHBG. So these blood chemistry patterns are really just to help us connect back to the lifestyle, intake form, and biofeedback. The biggest mistake people make is they think that they're going to have just come to a single workshop and get a single list of, here are some labs that maybe I should know about. And then they think that if they just know the number, that they're going to have the perfect answer to every problem that comes their way. That's not the case. It's really about understanding the patterns, critically thinking, and being able to move into action into your program design and the modifications that follow as a result of that. Thyroid issues also overlap with low testosterone in men, low progesterone and low testosterone in women. Gut issues like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, motility and constipation related issues, because of the connection with women having sometimes slightly lower bowel transit time, having the risk for low progesterone relative to higher estradiol, lower androgen concentrations relative to men. That all plays into the autoimmune risk, but women in and of themselves are 5 to 8 times more likely to experience thyroid dysfunction than men. So if you coach clients, you're primarily working with women, you should be aware that out of all the statistics that I shared earlier today, that women are 5 to 8 times more likely to experience those issues and also have an increased risk for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth as well in many cases. If you see any signs of depression or mental health concerns, now obviously you want to spot check things like vitamin D status, making sure someone's not deficient or just suffering from seasonal affective disorder or something like that, especially moving into fall, winter, late winter, early spring months where there's not as much sun or daylight throughout the day. But depression and mental health concerns should be a red flag to just spot check all reproductive hormones and thyroid. So low testosterone can relate to depression and mental health symptoms, and a lower thyroid or hypothyroid state can play into that as well. Autoimmunity, chronic infections, and toxicity. So we talk about things like mold toxicity or mycotoxicity in Metabolism School Mastery. So once folks have graduated from FNMS, other things related to chronic infections, more advanced autoimmune concepts, all of those things are important to know and they will come up. But the prevalence of some of the things we're talking about in terms of chronic dieting, micronutrient deficiencies, stress, that's more common in average clients. And then you will have those advanced cases where you need more advanced gut interventions, more understanding of autoimmunity as well, which we do teach inside FNMS and Metabolism School Mastery. So in terms of thyroid and the gut microbiome, it's not just a matter of like poor gut health leads to thyroid issues or thyroid issues negatively impact the gut. Like it's a very reciprocal sort of relationship or intertwined relationship. It's a two-way street, not just a one-way street. Having healthy thyroid levels supports appropriate motility and bowel transit time. It's also going to allow to support and maintain beneficial bacterial populations. And healthy thyroid status also indirectly supports short-chain fatty acid production. So it's, again, two-way street. Now, on the other side, having a healthy gut helps with thyroid conversion, T4 to T3. So it's kind of this really, when you're healthy, it's a feed forward cycle. When someone's suboptimal in terms of thyroid status and gut, it almost turns into, it feels like this negative sort of hamster wheel in terms of our health. So when we have that short chain fatty acid production, it nourishes colonocytes, it modulates the immune system, a lot of really great benefits that come from that. And also there's an impact and relationship between thyroid and mitochondrial health as well. So thyroid is very important in terms of mitochondria because T3 plays a critical role in mitochondrial biogenesis, and T3 supports enzyme activity, oxygen utilization, PGC1 alpha expression, key drivers of cellular energy production, and even oxidative balance. When thyroid signaling is impaired due to underconversion, stress, or even mitochondrial health declines, we see poor metabolic flexibility. We may see reductions in insulin sensitivity. That's kind of another two-way street as well. Someone who's obese or overweight or just insulin resistant in general, although that can go hand in hand, insulin resistance can negatively impact total daily energy expenditure or predicted total daily energy expenditure. And even in the absence of overt thyroid disease, there can still be negative consequences in terms of our mitochondrial health. So happy, healthy thyroid levels means more likely that we have happy, healthy mitochondria, and happy, healthy mitochondria likely going to lead to improved thyroid status. And then same thing with that gut relationship as well. If we have good motility, appropriate levels of stomach acid, the right bacterial populations, this is more in terms of trends and ratios, not like an absolute concentration that you're paying attention to. That means that the person has a greater likelihood that they just have a more robust state of health. They're more resilient, and it's easier to optimize hormones in that place. Let's talk about what to watch for in cases beyond just basic thyroid physiology and endocrinology. We mainly want to pay attention to blood chemistry, biofeedback, and body temperature. Those are big. I still talk about the basics as well. So things like a basic lifestyle questionnaire, a food log. I don't just mean macros. So if your version of a food log is like you get a printout or a PDF of MyFitnessPal, that is not just what I'm talking about. Even using something like Chronometer can really help in understanding someone's micronutrient status. A lot of the foods that are contributed to the MyFitnessPal database are user submitted and may lack appropriate micronutrient information. I'm sure you've seen sometimes too, the serving sizes are off in terms of macronutrient profiles. So it's not just solely dietary recall. It's not only just macros. Now macros play a role in total energy availability, which will impact what's going on with thyroid, especially if someone has a chronic dieting history. But we look at a food log more in depth to monitor, okay, has this person excluded, dietary sources of selenium or zinc or iodine? So let's say someone was on a vegan diet, they may be at risk for having subpar zinc status and B12 and iron, which is also important for thyroid. Now, let's say someone's just gluten and dairy free. Well, if you're gluten-free, you may be missing certain vitamins that you would get in like a B complex vitamin. If you are dairy-free, you're not only removing calcium from the equation, but that is a source in the Western diet of iodine. And unless you're consuming things like seaweed, cranberry, or iodized salt, you may be in a situation where maybe the only iodine you're getting would be in like a multivitamin. Some multis don't even really have a great source of iodine in there too. So it doesn't mean you need to go out and supplement with crazy amounts of that particular nutrient. I'm just using it as an example to understand of how we really want to be able to take more of a fine-tooth comb and an advanced understanding of nutrition to a food log versus only looking at macros. We also want to understand in biofeedback, sleep, hunger, recovery, energy, digestion, stress, being able to have conversations around that as stress goes up. That can impact thyroid function. As sleep is compromised, can impact thyroid function. If thyroid function is suboptimal, we may see changes in overall energy levels, mood, motivation, desire to train. So that's very important. And potentially recovery impairments as well, because if someone's having to maybe eat lower calories to maintain their weight, maybe has lower nutrient status. Again, that has consequences in terms of intense training and being able to recover from that adequately. So it's both are impacting each other. It's not just a one-way street. With blood chemistry, remember we talked about that full thyroid panel, understanding of TSH, free T4, free T3. If you have total T4 and total T3, that's fine. But really we want to see what is eventually happening when we get downstream after that enzymatic conversion and what's happening there. Some folks like to have reverse T3 on there as well to see what's going on in terms of that biological opposite of free T3. If your clients have a autoimmune risk or predisposition to that, or they're suffering from different gut health symptoms, have elevated C-reactive protein levels, which is an inflammatory marker. Those would all be indications that maybe I want to go a little bit deeper there. So full thyroid panel, inflammatory status, oxidative stress, reproductive hormones, because in many cases, if someone is hypothyroid and they also have gut issues and they're constipated, now they're going to have a hard time excreting estrogen. We may have some symptoms of imbalance, or we have lower progesterone levels leading to PMS and discomfort around the menstrual cycle. So all of these things are interconnected. And while obviously this workshop you attended to learn specifically about thyroid in isolation isn't as powerful as understanding how the endocrine system and also gut work together in terms of understanding total body systems and having a proven approach to actually help people with their health. And that's why we talk about kind of looking at all 360 degrees of a client case versus just, I'm zoomed in on TSH, T4, T3, or just someone's thyroid health. Body temperature is very important in these cases because if we see this dip, now, typically, right, if you were to go to the doctor or you hear average sort of human body temperatures, right, you hear like 98 degree, just above 98 degrees. If someone has a fever, that's obviously going significantly higher. If someone's hypothyroid, they're more likely to be cold. Hyperthyroid is elevated heart rate, elevated body temperature, kind of the opposite of what people are experiencing with hypo. Now, hypothyroid, someone may be in that state or be suffering from symptoms. They're below 97.5 degrees, and that's consistent when they take their morning temperature or they have that when they take that basal body temperature each day. Now, you can also use body temperature for fertility awareness method in terms of cycle tracking, fertility monitoring, and menstrual cycle health. And it can be helpful too, because you can see what's going on in terms of, especially in like cold and flu season as well, if someone's potentially starting to get sick or they do have a fever. Temperature obviously has a number of different roles that it can play. But with thyroid cases, when it dips, especially, lower 97s into 96, that could be a sign, in addition to things like hair issues, brittle nails, skin issues, constipation, impaired motility, being cold despite of moderate ambient temperatures. So like if this room is not that cold, but I have cold extremities, or I feel cold all the time, or I'm shivering, or I have goosebumps, that would be a sign, right? If that's continuously happening each and every day as we're moving through. So feeling cold in more of a warm ambient environment. Now, if it's cold outside and you're outside and it's 35 degrees Fahrenheit, or, cold, if you were to convert that to Celsius, the equivalent of freezing, getting below 36 or 32 degrees. Now, that's not necessarily something where I would jump to the conclusion that your client was cold for one day and it was snowing outside and it's on the verge of freezing. You wouldn't jump to the conclusion that someone's hypothyroid, right? You'd monitor morning body temperatures. You'd look at how are they inside? Are they cold? You'd look at biofeedback, things like gut health, in terms of digestion. You'd look at their energy levels. You have more of a comprehensive understanding of what's actually going on. So when we look at this thyroid focus, there's obviously we have like a base intake form that we use for our functional nutrition and metabolism specialist students. So when you have that intake form, you may want to ask additional follow-up questions, which we use something called a symptom scorecard, especially if someone specifically suffers with thyroid, gut, adrenal issues, etc. So on the gut portion of the symptom scorecard, we're looking at things like cold extremities, hair loss, constipation or slowed motility, unexplained weight gain with no change in diet, and very low energy. Now, if you look to the other side of the screen, what you'll notice is we have example labs, right? So I took a little screenshot. Now, this person doesn't necessarily have like rock bottom free T3. Their TPO antibodies are actually single digits. This isn't like a crazy case. I'm just using a screenshot as an example of like, these are markers that are more specific than TSH. And when you have access to these, combined with a symptom scorecard, so when you combine symptom scorecard and you combine more comprehensive lab set along with things like body temperature and your intake form and health history and food blog, now all of a sudden I actually have some traction to be able to really design an effective program for this person. So let's say they score high across the board on this. The higher the score, that's an indication, a good possibility that they may have some thyroid issues. Now, you may have clients who are already prescribed thyroid medications. We'll talk about common Western meds in a little bit. You may have someone who is prescribed those medications and still symptomatic. That would mean that maybe they need to discuss the dose with their doctor or pharmacist. So just because someone comes to you on a prescription for levothyroxine or Synthroid, there's actually a very good chance that if they just received kind of a cookie cutter dose from a physician, they may not, number one, have optimal serum levels, but two, they may still be symptomatic. And so the best providers understand that we're looking at symptoms just as much as we're looking at the numbers. Because if someone has low body temps, they're constipated, they have motility issues, and they're scoring high on all of these different symptoms and have red flags, well, it's a sign that something's off in terms of that treatment plan and what they have in terms of their overall medication. So that would be a situation where a client should get a second opinion, work with a more experienced provider or specialist in that area, or maybe even if they have a good relationship with the person who scripted in the first place, talk about what they're experiencing, because sometimes people don't know what to ask or how to have that discussion. So in 3 examples that we have here, in terms of these client cases, right? We have more of a conventional under-eating case. We could have someone who has more of gut-driven symptoms in terms of gut issues that are contributing to thyroid, because the gut is a center of inflammation in the body. And so those gut issues and dysbiosis and bacterial overgrowths create immune activation that can be a preceding risk factor to thyroid issues and even autoimmunity. And then a third example is just someone who's been on birth control for a very long time, has nutrient deficiencies, and maybe even on an SSRI as well. So there are common client medications that can impact overall thyroid status. So let's focus on the first 2 that we can really focus on that are not involving prescription medications in this training. So when a client is under eating, training in excess of their recovery capabilities, and getting poor sleep, we'll probably see something like a maybe normal TSH for a while, but they have low T3, maybe higher reverse T3 levels. Note that they can be symptomatic even without the higher reverse T3 levels. A lot of people think that, oh, well, if the client doesn't have those higher levels, then maybe nothing's going on. That's not the case, because if the person has symptoms like fatigue, they're cold, slow weight loss, in spite of doing what they need to do from a nutrition perspective, having those habits in place, low libido, hair shedding, low heart rate, this is a kind of example of one of those more popular case presentations that we discussed earlier in the training. Client example number 2, client comes with bloating, irregular stools. Now the bloating, maybe if they're having early fullness at meals as well, maybe they have low stomach acid. Maybe they have a past IBS diagnosis from their doctor. A lot of times you'll see IBS-C as the diagnosis from a gastroenterologist overlapping with someone who's been to a primary care physician or endocrinologist and has a hypothyroidism diagnosis, and they're being treated with T4 medications. They may have sleep disturbances and high stress. Now, in these cases, even though their labs may be borderline, maybe with the treatment, it's brought their TSH down, but maybe their TSH was climbing prior to taking T4. T4, when you bring it in exogenously, is going to lower TSH. So T4 medication, taking levothyroxine, that's an external source of thyroxine, which is T4. Taking T4 lowers TSH, and as a result of that, you're going to see that change in the labs. Now, if the person's on a very low dose, it may not lower it to the same degree. If they're on a higher dose, it may lower TSH more significantly. If someone's on T4 and T3, you're just going to see that TSH go down, and you'll see the T3 elevation because they're taking the T3 medication. That's not as common in Western medicine. It's typically T4. So symptoms here for the gut client that has this as a preceding risk factor for their thyroid issues could be mood swings. It could be low energy. It's that bloating. Maybe they're only having a couple bowel movements per week. Maybe they're going 2 to 3 times. So that, you could have IBS-C, or maybe someone's having looser bowel movements or discomfort, or they're going too frequently and they're experiencing malabsorption. But either way, gut issues are going to play into that thyroid conversion. This case is more likely that with low energy skin issues and low heart rate, if they had low heart rate combined with low body temperature, combined with that low free T3, that's more evidence for more of that hypothyroid state. So, and remember, not all of these, you may have someone who has that presentation, they're not on medication yet, they have not received a formal diagnosis from their doctor. If you are a nutrition coach, a registered dietitian, a strength and conditioning professional, a health coach, or you view yourself as like a holistic practitioner, you're not the one making any type of diagnosis, right? Your interpretation is, how does this apply to nutrition, exercise, lifestyle, supplementation, and then through certain professional programs, you may be able to access some additional tools like we do for our students. They have the ability to access labs and a higher quality supplement dispensary and different things that their clients need to be able to produce the results in more advanced cases like this, while still doing what's required both from an ethical perspective and being in a scope of practice that's appropriate for whatever their initial baseline certification was. So let's talk a little bit, speaking of supplements, let's kind of move into a discussion of natural thyroid supplementation. People will ask me questions about things like glandulars and different thyroid products, and what about like Mega Thyroblast 7000, for whatever, to optimize thyroid hormone. And the truth is, while there are certain, some products are better than others, there's good apples, there's bad apples. The patterns and things that you should look for is that many clients first have those micronutrient deficiencies. They have high stress or poor sleep. They have GI issues. So the first 3 to 4 things you might look at might simply be high quality micronutrient for what they're deficient in. So just like if we were talking about women's health, right? And someone had PMS symptoms, magnesium and vitamin B6 are great for supporting some of the less favorable symptoms that a woman may experience in the luteal phase. Well, with thyroid, maybe selenium, zinc. Now, zinc is in a lot of different products, multivitamins, gut health blends. So you want to be careful not to overdo the elemental zinc. But Let's say selenium, for example, if people aren't eating foods like Brazil nuts or getting selenium from other dietary sources, maybe they're including a product or thyroid support that includes selenium. There's different herbals, GI supportive supplements, maybe autoimmune specific supplements. So black seed oil or Nigella sativa can be helpful in different autoimmune Hashimoto's cases. Again, supplements are on a case-by-case basis, so there's no blanket recommendations here or medical advice. But this is an example of how there might be 3 to 4 different products that your clients may benefit from before just jumping to something because it has like a thyroid glandular in it, right? This is different than a natural desiccated thyroid product. So prescription natural desiccated thyroid products have more of a standardized concentration that they report in terms of T4 and T3, and you're more readily able to compare that to other thyroid formulations and prescription preparations. So these 3 to 4 supplement categories are supported by research and evidence, and they can be helpful. And let's say someone has overlap, like maybe they're PCOS and hypothyroid. There's products from quality supplement manufacturers that maybe have inositol and selenium in the same product, and inositol is helping not only with PCOS, but it's great in certain contexts for thyroid and autoimmunity. And then we have selenium, which is contributing to overall antioxidant status, but selenoproteins are also really important for the conversion of T4 to T3 as well. Now let's talk about what about thyroid prescriptions, because so many clients may be interested or they're coming to you and they're already taking prescriptions and you need to be able to spot it on their intake form. So common thyroid prescriptions include levothyroxine, which is the generic version of a popular drug called Synthroid. This is just T4. So when you hear levothyroxine, look at a key phrase in that whole entire discussion of medications is thyroxine. So thyroxine is T4. Leothyrine is T3. And that's used to be referred to as the brand Cytomel, but that's less popular now. So usually it's a generic leothyrine that people are receiving or generic T3 medication. Sometimes you'll have a combination of T4 and T3 in terms of Synthroid and receiving leothyrine or leothyronine. And then for combinations, you also have your natural desiccated products or NDTs, which contain a combination, but it's because it's from porcine glandular. So when you have that NDT product, it contains standardized concentrations of T4, T3, T2, T1. You're actually getting a blend of things, which some people like, but also some people achieve improvements in their thyroid status by taking T4 and T3. Not everyone necessarily needs to take an NDT. This is something that you would decide with your provider based on your labs and go from there. But certainly there are some people who really enjoy taking that, and little tricks and things that you can do depending on your thyroid status. Some people are even dosing, for example, they're paying attention to the timing of their dosing. Now, what's important about any thyroid prescription is that you discuss it with your provider and your pharmacist on the timing of when you're taking thyroid. A lot of people make the mistake of their prescribed thyroid medication, they're taking it the wrong time, or they're not following the dosage instructions. So in order to get the best results, that is certainly very, very important in terms of thyroid prescriptions as well. So the proven approach for thyroid cases, or really any more advanced functional health issues, is we're using a combination of biofeedback, blood work, body composition, basal body temperature, and the basics. But we may scale those basics, right? Like better understanding of nutrition, food logs, exercise programming, lifestyle, schedule, stress management. So even though stress management is something that a lot of people consider to be basic, you can go beyond the foundations of just telling your clients to be less stressed and actually having evidence-based strategies to help them with that. Biofeedback goes beyond just shreds, which is kind of my more beginner intermediate version of biofeedback to help coaches who are starting out. The symptom scorecard is more of an advanced biofeedback screening tool that's going to incorporate different areas like adrenal, gut health, also looking at reproductive hormones and more. So let's say you're working with a women's health client where maybe there's some cycle dysfunction or dysregulation, there's thyroid concerns, there's gut concerns. You'd be able to see all of that and kind of map that out in a single place. Blood work and testing. So blood work is obviously referring to serum labs like we discussed today for thyroid, but there's other types of tests as well. So in certain cases, if you wanted like a cortisol pattern or more circadian rhythm, you could use a salivary or urinary test for that. So there's salivary testing. like from Genova, or urinary testing would be like a Dutch adrenal. Other forms of testing would be like a PCR test for gut health, and that's a particular type of stool test. Now, body composition, obviously, that's where most people come into the health and fitness space, is helping people improve their body composition. But realize body composition is often kind of a lagging indicator of success and progress. When improving body temps, biofeedback, and blood work, when you optimize those things, it may make it easier to achieve the desired body composition or goals that your clients have. And I would ask yourself to think, kind of think and reflect honestly to yourself. You're probably only doing 2 or 3 out of the 5 or 4 out of the 5 right now. And maybe even if you are trying to do the 5, you're not very confident in every single one of these. Maybe you're super confident in 3 of them, but the goal is to have 5 out of 5 confidence and competence to be able to help your clients responsibly and drive those results, improving their health, but also the physique outcomes as well. So when it comes to working these cases and understanding metabolic health issues, whether it's thyroid, reproductive hormones, fertility concerns, PCOS, autoimmune risk factors, we're using that combination of, having done for you proven system that includes intake forms, your shreds biofeedback, understanding how to actually do a food log assessment, and educating your clients on how to fill those nutrient gaps, health history questionnaires, serum labs, being able to steer body composition without having to crash diet people or just solely focus on calories and macros. Now, obviously, controlling portions, getting adequate protein, doing those basics is important. The problem is, not every coach understands the appropriate dose of each basic ingredient. So for example, training is great, right? But different clients require different amounts of resistance training. Someone with thyroid issues may need a different type of training stimulus than someone who's overweight and obese, or maybe a woman with PCOS or endometriosis, or someone who's just struggling to lose, the last 10 pounds of body fat in the later portions of a diet phase. So whether it's they're struggling and they have that friction in terms of weight loss, or someone who's just experiencing unfavorable symptoms, it's not just about knowing the basics, it's about understanding how to dose them appropriately. And remember, 100% of coaches make modifications to clients' training and nutrition that impacts physiology, but only like 10% or less of coaches really truly understand physiology on a deeper level. And most of them are graduates of the FNMS program inside Metabolism School. So you need to have versions of this and tools at your disposal and have the skill to be able to guide people through this, whether it's some of the 20 million people who have thyroid issues or women's health cases, perimenopause, or more. So that's what our focus is inside the Functional Nutrition and Metabolism Specialization program. You can learn more at metabolismschool.com. If you are a student of ours and you're attending this today, I would highly encourage you, in addition to this review on thyroid health, make use of the thyroid case study. Use the thyroid action guide for a client who's experiencing these issues. Use the reference guide as a quick way to kind of study up to make content of your own, or even use our content action guide to create something about thyroid health related to today's presentation. Now, if you're not inside FNMS, you're not going to have all those done for you resources and tools until you actually apply and take that next step in terms of leveling up your skills, your confidence, and expertise to be able to deploy this with your clients in real time. And we work with you live, step by step, each and every week inside the FNMS program. And then ultimately, so many of these folks are in Metabolism School Mastery as well. And I'll actually be teaching on that later today after I finish this presentation. So if you are interested in getting support with those challenging cases, whether it's autoimmune, insulin resistance, PCOS, chronic dieters, maybe you work with people post-birth control or post bodybuilding competitions or bikini or physique athletes, photo shoots, gut health, hormone issues, menopause, more, that's all covered inside of FNMS. You don't have to just kind of go and take these singular classes or recordings or end up just racking up this massive total because you're buying all of these things separately. It's actually having a proven system and vehicle that's been used by coaches around the world to increase their skill set, but also have better offers inside their business, feel more confident in terms of creating content around these topics online, and really building their authority and differentiating themselves from what is a pretty crowded market of coaches right now. So if you want to learn more, head over to metabolismschool.com. You can apply for FNMS. You'll also receive some follow-up emails if you are viewing this presentation specifically. We'll help you with your client cases with live support from mentors and our team. We'll install our proven methods and systems and help you through our 3-phase approach. You'll get access to the health testing that you need for your clients, and we'll actually help you interpret that and deploy it. Even if you're someone who hasn't previously been confident, you don't have to worry about access or scope of practice or all these things, because we've done all of that legwork and background for you to help you be able to install this in your business in less time without the additional upfront cost that you would need if you were to do it on your own, and the massive amount of time it would take for you to try to figure this out. So if that's something of interest to you, head over to metabolismschool.com. In the meantime, I will stay on for some questions related to thyroid health, but also understand that each sort of case here is going to be a little bit different in terms of presentation. So what's most important today, if you're attending, if you're someone who has more intermediate to advanced understanding, and this is review for you in terms of thyroid and the endocrine system, then you may be interested in something like FNMS that's going to have a little more advanced education. If you're a beginner intermediate coach and you're just looking to gain confidence in these areas, obviously there was a lot that we covered today to help your understanding of how thyroid hormone is produced, why conversion can be impacted by things like chronic stress, chronic dieting, and inflammation. We talked about key thyroid nutrients, things that will play into overall thyroid health, and certain risk factors that people may have, as well as the actual markers to check, biofeedback indicators, body temperature, and potential signs and symptoms that signal that someone's actually having a thyroid issue. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you grabbed any type of photo of attending this particular workshop, if you post it online, please tag me. I'm at Sam Miller Science on just about every major platform. I try to respond to you guys directly, and thank you guys for showing up. So with that said, thanks so much for joining today's thyroid health training. And I'll stay on for a bit for those who are live to answer a couple questions.